Imagine opening your email to find years of history deleted. Only a single email remains. A ransomware request for $2 million. You think to yourself, how could this happen to me? You see, there's two types of companies. Those that have been hacked and those that will be hacked. The weight of responsibility comes crashing down on you. It's the sort of responsibility you feel when your family is craving a delicious pizza. You finally open the box only to find the most cringe-worthy topping that you mistakenly ordered. Join Pineapple on Pizza podcast as John and George, along with guest executives, discuss the most common and craziest cybersecurity risks, followed by actionable tips and strategies that can be implemented to protect your cyber risk pie. Pineapple on Pizza is hosted by Omnistruct.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Pineapple on Pizza. Today, we've got a great guest here, and she's a search and rescue enthusiast who loves to explore the great outdoors. She's prone to crazy adventures in life, like explaining how she got impaled while working in IT. She trains canines to help find people in the forest, and fell in love with the CMMC by attending an event and never turning back. Welcome, Amira Armond. Oh, that was brutal. How you doing?
Hi, thank you for having me.
Great. Well, we're just going to jump right in here with our leading question, which is, if cyber risk was a pizza and the frameworks were a crust, what's the riskiest topping you've seen, and what topping would you equate that to?
So I love onion on pizza, and I am always afraid to order it. So that would be my most risky topping. And the reason why, this is such a weird analogy. The reason why is because it's very hard to trust that the pizza place will get it right. Sometimes they undercook it, you get raw onion on your pizza. Sometimes they use the very spicy yellow onion as opposed to a more savory red. And part of the reason why I bring that up is because one of the things I do in cybersecurity is I talk a lot about supply chain cybersecurity. Can you trust your vendors to be secure? Can you trust your clouds to be secure? Because I've seen it on both sides. I've been the user, but I've also been on the cloud side, and I know what it's like on the cloud side. You know, they've got servers too. They've got switches and workstations and regular people too. And it can be just as messy as your network. You just can't tell because it's a cloud. So that's kind of my analogy to a pizza.
And I'm right there with you, because I'm one of those people that if an onion is cooked, I'm okay. If it's not cooked, it's just too spicy. So I definitely feel that, and definitely, you know, more, you never know if you're getting red or white or yellow or, you know, what color onion. So yeah, that spice is definitely it. I honestly thought you were going to go more for like peeling back the layers of the onion, but you know, that's okay. I liked your analogy better.
Do you get many onion references on this one? What's the most common?
I think that's the first.
It's the first. Yeah.
Yeah, I think the most common is usually anchovies. But I think one of the strangest one was peanut butter on pizza. So I mean,
that's some European pizza people over there. Yeah.
You've heard. In my situation, we avoid onions on our pizza altogether, but we love onions.
But that's because like it's like a relationship between you and a managed services provider. It's scary to trust that person to do the right thing.
Well, that's not the reason though. The reason is because, we now have a 7-year-old, and when he eats, like, he sometimes drops food on the ground, and onions for our dog.
Oh, yep.
That's why, because we have
no poisoning the pup.
Yeah, we have a dog we love a lot, and the last thing we need is having her go after the pepperoni with onion that our now 7-year-old drops. But we're very close. We think we've got it to he's not dropping as much food anymore, because he's first grade, right? So we're like, okay, maybe soon, we'll see.
Get back to those onions on that pizza. That'd be good.
Well, I think it's very applicable too, because, you know, what your risks are, you know, and the reason, the justification, you know, the justifications can be different, right? So we all have a reason, right? And just like
maybe your example could be adopting a solution that in most cases would be awesome, but you don't have the tech expertise or techniques internal to actually take advantage of it.
So that's I think that's why we love this topic so much of pineapple on pizza. It's just it can resonate in so many unique ways. So yeah, no, great answer though. I love that. I did not think you were going to go in the direction with onions that you went with. So but that tells me that you and I would definitely enjoy pizza together, because I have the same problem you do in terms of the onion. I love onion. So
yeah.
So Amira, tell me, what keeps you up at night? What problems are you seeing with your customers? What keeps you up at night?
Golly. So for context on that, you need to know a little bit about what I do. I run a company that performs cybersecurity assessments, primarily of defense contractors. And what keeps me up at night is worrying that we are going to assess a company and have a very, very bad result, because the company fundamentally does not understand cybersecurity or what they're getting themselves into by requesting an assessment. It's very ironic that a company will say, I want to give you money, right? Take cybersecurity people and review me. But when we actually start the process and we go, okay, we're going to do this, you know, where's your inventories? They go, what do you mean? I need to know every computer that's on my network? And we go, yeah, that's like step one. And like that, it starts going downhill from there. So I put out a lot of free content to try and explain the kind of the minimum standards, you know, what an assessor is looking for, what you need to do to prepare for cybersecurity if you're a defense contractor. But it keeps happening. The message hasn't gone out yet, so it does keep me up at night.
I can definitely understand that. We've seen something similar along those lines. And so tell us what some of your biggest challenges are in meeting regulatory requirements today. I mean, you're actually doing the auditing of that. So, and you mentioned that first step is an issue. What do you see? What do you see companies struggling with beyond that?
So in our area, you guys might have heard about the CMMC, the Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification, which is the Department of Defense's answer to supply chain cybersecurity. They're basically telling defense contractors that they need to be third-party assessed by a qualified cybersecurity assessor to verify that they're actually performing the 110 requirements in that have been defined by the National Institute of Standards and Technology. So there's a lot in that sentence. Sorry. NIST, National Institutes of Standards and Technology, wrote a document, said, here's all the things you need to be doing for cybersecurity, and we come and assess that. The challenges that we're really facing as assessors is we lack guidance from the Department of Defense about how to handle situations where there's external service providers, such as managed services providers, managed security service providers, the guys that do the audit logging and the incident response, or clouds, such as like Microsoft 365 or AWS, which those are well known. But we also run into situations where people have engineering clouds or architecture clouds that they use, which are not well known. And the DoD is basically saying all of those external service providers need to be secure themselves. That's great, right? That's great. We don't want the managed service provider to be hacked, and then all the clients get hacked. But they're also not encouraging anyone to assess those external service providers yet. So we don't have a method to verify their security other than assessing them as part of their clients, which gets very ugly from an assessment standpoint. I don't want to be assessing two completely different networks during the same assessment.
Yeah.
Which then can make it even more difficult, because then they've got another 30 or 40 or 50 or 100 clients beyond that the MSP that could have that. Yeah, that's definitely a moving target. Out of the control. Go ahead.
We are expecting the DoD to release guidance on that question, though, in about 3 or 4 months. They're supposed to release a big regulation that says how to perform the CMMC certification process. So I'm over here crossing my fingers, just hoping for some clarity. Mm-hmm.
That would be good. So what do you, in the assessments that you've done, out of those 110 controls, which ones do you find are the struggle to get implemented the most?
So that's a cool question, because I'm not going to say about my own personal experience, but the Department of Defense, they actually released a presentation about their statistical analysis of assessments performed on defense contractors using the same requirements that I use. And the number one hardest requirement, which it's a huge percent of defense contractors don't meet it, something like 30-50% of them, is the FIPS validated modules for cryptography, so let's back up. When you have data that you're trying to protect, you're protecting it either by encrypting it onto the hard drive, or you're encrypting it while it passes across the internet. And to do that, you're going to use an algorithm such as AES or triple DES, or whatever the algorithm is, right? Which is the mathematical equation of encrypting the data. But the federal government, via NIST, their standard for encryption is to use a program, a module, an app, right? So not just the code, but like an end-to-end application to perform the encryption, which includes the algorithm inside of it. And they say you have to use a validated module. Well, problem is it takes perhaps 3 years to put a new piece of software or a new piece of hardware through that validation program, and it's costly. For example, Windows, which everyone uses, including the government, the last version of Windows that was FIPS validated was Windows 10 from 2018. So technically, anybody using Windows is either missing a whole lot of critical patches, or they're not compliant with FIPS, including the government themselves. It's kind of a horrible requirement, which we actually, so one of the very cool things that happened very recently, yesterday, is NIST released a draft version of that 800-171 document, the one that has all the requirements in it. And they changed the wording of this encryption requirement so that it seems like you might be able to avoid using a FIPS validated module. Now, you might be able to use other algorithms or other types of encryption, and that's very exciting.
Great to hear. I definitely have seen some of that myself, and dealing with the FIPS modules, and they're not easy to configure or get things running on either. So that's wonderful information and great. You heard it here first. How's that? Well, I don't know, maybe not. Maybe you guys did a press release.
And you had asked, what other major struggles do defense contractors have with cybersecurity? A couple other ones are, and this wasn't a requirement, but it's kind of a prerequisite, is virtually every defense contractor has trouble identifying the information that they're supposed to protect. So they're supposed to protect a category of information called controlled unclassified information, which is basically information that fits into a protected category. Could be privacy data, could be health records, or it could be some cool stuff like, here's how to build a tank, here's how to build a missile, here's how the satellite is deployed, because we're talking about Department of Defense stuff. And that information can come in many ways. It could be sent via an email, it could be in a Word document, it could be in Excel, it could be in program code, it could be a drawing. And when you get away from the pure document format, it gets harder and harder to label it appropriately, right? Most people don't know how to put a label onto software code, for example. How do you label a database? Very hard to do. So when they share this information, they need to share it with the contractors so that they can build the missile, the tank, the satellite. But quite often, even the government forgets to label it appropriately. And now the contractor has this thing that looks awfully important, but it doesn't say that it's CUI. So that's an issue that literally 95% of defense contractors have. And there's no great solution for it other than having meetings with your customers, the ones that are sending you the information, and saying, hey, let's work this out together. Let's figure it out. Because everyone's having that issue. And that's not even CMMC or 800-171 requirement. That's a prerequisite to getting to the assessment. The other major requirements that people tend to miss are typically from misunderstanding in my book. So things like how you apply the audit logging requirements, how you do incident response testing, how you do configuration management and inventorying. The requirements, when you read them, at first glance, they seem pretty simple, right? Have an inventory. But when you actually dig into how they are assessed, we could take that have an inventory and split it out into 6 different things that you have to do. And those are yes/no questions, and they're very stringent. Have a baseline configuration. Well, what is that? Right? The baseline configuration has to include 6 different things. And then it has to be shown to be modified over time. And then now we have the inventory. The inventory has to exist. Okay, well, most people have the inventory part. That's great. But then it needs to include 6 different types of information. Most people don't have that. And then again, the inventory has to be maintained over time. Maybe or maybe not. And that's just one of the 110 requirements. So when we actually get to assessment readiness, it's way, way, way more detailed than most people realize. But it's not that much harder. Like performing an incident response test, it's not that hard. I can lead one. I can run a company through a test in about 3 hours, right? We can get it done, and then you're done for the year. But most people don't understand how to do it and what qualifies as a test. You're laughing, John.
I'm laughing only because I definitely agree with that. I mean, they don't understand, or it depends on who you're working with. It depends on the how technical they are, or because what I've seen is that there's technical questions, there's business questions, and so getting the right people in the room helps. But even then, a lot of times it's, I need to go find something, or I need to go look, or there's not it's not at the tip of their tongue, on their fingers right there. So yeah, it ends up, I've seen them take quite a bit longer for audits like that. Weeks sometimes, right? Because they're trying to gather data, or they're trying to fix it as they go along. Oh, you asked for that, and then they try and fix it because they didn't have it.
Right. And I personally, hate to mark somebody not met because they're missing a sentence in a policy. But there's many cases with the type of assessments we do where one of the things we have to check is, do they have that sentence written somewhere? It's so simple, so easy to do, but people just don't realize that they have to have a sentence written down.
Yeah, I think it's a big piece of the equation that doesn't apply just for CMMC, but also for omnibus privacy laws as well. So there are organizations that are DoD subcontractors that are potentially collecting personal information as well. And so, but we've had instances where we've had some teams that, well, we wrote an ISO 27001 policy, so we, we've got that base covered. We're not going to, we don't care about what's in 800-171 because I've done the 27001 should work. Okay? And it's so it's basically the same as saying, well, I'm based in Texas, so I don't have to worry about California privacy laws. Well, if you're doing business with taxpayers in California, yes, you do, if under certain threshold. And so I think that lesson applies across what essentially are both what essentially we would say are frameworks, as well as regulatory and statutory requirements in general. So that's always been our biggest challenge is, that missing sentence, right, is often written off as, well, I have it over here, so that should be fine, right? And this other thing that I'm dealing with, right? And that's where it gets a little messy. But yeah, I've got the same challenge with the cyber risk side of, the GRC function and such is, is bigger than just CMMC, right? But if you don't get CMMC right, it affects your pocketbook as a business, like significantly.
Oh yeah.
If you miss something and now you can no longer bid, that's bad news. That's a revenue problem. So, and that tends to be the bigger concern is how is some regulation or risk going to impact my revenue? Yeah. So, and we're hopeful that the mindset isn't just revenue, that people want to do the right thing, especially when nobody's watching, and that you kind of have to know what to do without being told what to do when it comes to the cybersecurity side of things in a business. And often a lot of education is required, is what I've learned. What has been your experience on the educational side in terms of bringing people up to speed?
Definitely. There's a huge shortage in institutional knowledge about cybersecurity, especially the federal government cybersecurity. Going back to what you mentioned about companies, this is a threat to their business if they don't pass the assessment. That is for defense contractors, and honestly, if you're a federal contractor, this should also be something on your radar because it's coming. But for defense contractors, this is come. It is imminent that if you cannot pass a CMMC assessment, if you cannot perform all the requirements, that you will not be eligible to win new contracts. And my little company, I'm not a defense contractor, but I had to pass the CMMC assessment with my company in order to do assessments. And so I feel it because in 2 years from now, I'm going to have to get reassessed. And if I fail, my company will stop. We will not be eligible to do work anymore. So it's just as imminent a threat for us as it would be for a defense contractor. And when the requirements change over time, the DoD issues new stipulations, you have to have this from clouds, you have to have this from a managed service provider. Every single say is a real threat to my entire company. So I definitely have sympathy for the defense contractors. Now, with education in regard to CMMC and 800-171, which is that source of the technical requirements, if you have a strong sysadmin background, you can generally start studying and make sense of this stuff. It really does help if you are a cybersecurity expert and you focus on the governance, risk, and compliance side. Then you'll have somebody actually trying to teach you it, hopefully. But a lot of it is being embedded in organizations that are doing the security at the level that's needed and just seeing what that looks like. So for me, I spent most of my career as a system admin. After a little, I was a little help desk-y person, system admin, and then I moved into more of a systems engineer, integrator, architecture role over time, but it was always working with the Department of Defense. So I got to see what that looked like, what vulnerability scanning looks like, what user access looks like, how they handle privileged users. And that gave me a huge amount of context for what the federal government expects from their defense contractors. And going back to, the shortage in institutional knowledge, you have to have somebody with that level of knowledge in your organization to be successful, right? You need to have gone through an assessment to realize just how much you don't know. And that just takes time. So one of the things that would make the CMMC program hugely better is if they could phase it in, not the way they're doing it right now, which is they're phasing it in on this contract or that contract, but if they phased in the percentage of requirements you need to do to pass. So if they made everyone has to do it now, right? So let's release it out, but you only have to do half the requirements. And then in a year, you need to do 60%. And then another year, you have to do 70%. And another year, you have to do 80%. Within about 7 years, everybody's going to be running at 100%, but they've had the easy assessments and they've had the time to build up that institutional knowledge. And we've actually been able to deploy it because people can pass, which is a struggle right now because the DoD wants people to be basically perfect to pass, which means that they have to be very, very careful which contracts they require it for. Because if they require it today, they might not have anybody bidding on the contract.
Right.
Right. So they've made it so hard that they can't push it out in pursuit of perfection. Whereas if they accepted not great in about 5, 6, 7 years, they could reach that perfection state.
Yeah, I think it's a valid point, but as you mentioned in the, I do wonder, and then this is me positing, what I think the problem might be, is leverage procurement. I mean, that we're talking about contracts. And so bringing up an entire contracts administration group in any public sector entity, for something to change every single year, it's not going to be pretty for a lot of the leverage procurement that's out there. So I think that's the struggle is, it is change. It is, I agree that it would be great if it was done in steps. But I don't think the procurement function today is, prepared for such a situation. And so the question then becomes, how do you make sure procurement can keep up? And that's all.
I do have a simple solution for that.
Oh, I'd love to hear it because I've been thinking.
You simply say they need a CMMC certificate issued by an assessment organization, and then you tell the assessment organizations this year They only need to hit 50% to pass, to get their certificate. And then next time you assess them, whatever year it is, they have to hit that percentage. So
But
the
at least-
procurement
at least
officers don't even know. They
50%,
they just see the certificate and
Yeah.
they say, great.
Yeah, with the percentage. Yeah, that's actually a great answer. Can
Perfect.
you hang around at my house for a while? Because you can come up with some good answers to problems I'm trying to figure out. How do you make this easy for non-technical people, for not, I mean, we're all working on this. And let's face it, everything with a blinking light gets tossed over to the fence of the technical people, right? And when you start getting into interdepartmental issues, and especially the case in cyber risk situations, is, sometimes it's somebody in marketing who makes a mistake and violates, some statutory requirement, or procurement, I mean, in most cases, which is where a lot of these enforcement points, tend to exist within the CMMC, and also in private sector as well. We're seeing more, call outs and contracts and those sorts of things. So yeah, it's a difficult ballet across the board, but I love that idea.
Oh, I mean, I can understand where people come from. You have to be perfect. You have to be doing all the cybersecurity to pass, which is they don't want to be on the hook if somebody gets hacked. And they said that was fine, right? You don't have to have antivirus. That's fine. And then they get hacked, and then there's news, and somebody gets in trouble and it looks bad. But at the same time, risk, the entire concept of risk, is making a judgment of what is acceptable and what is the most effective and efficient way to handle it. And requiring all risk to be stopped at all costs will either bankrupt us or we won't be able to do work, right? There's always that sliding scale of finding what is functional and what is cost effective.
Totally agree. And this could be a 4-hour podcast speaking with you, I imagine. I don't think we have 4 hours. But I feel educated, so thank you so much. At least in terms of the ways to tackle the problems is, requires critical thinking amongst multiple folks with different experiences. So and your experience clearly has tremendous amount of value in terms of understanding how to tackle some of these more difficult issues of procurement. We're just hopeful that somebody at NASPO, hey NASPO folks, or somebody within some of these other leverage procurement bodies are tuned into our podcast. So but obviously the CMMC has got a designated audience, and we probably have a few of those for sure. So hopefully people will listen and learn the same way that I did. So thank you. John, I can't seem to bring up the rest of the agenda on my side. Where are we at this point?
Yeah. So Amira, I mean, so how do you think things are now? I mean, we've kind of described how, some of the plans there. I mean, do you think that most companies are going to be able to reach this level of achievement, or do we really need to do that 50% now? And how long do we give them? And what do you think on that? What's that future look like?
So I am a big mouth. I talk a lot. I'm willing to give out unpopular opinions, and I am very thankful and grateful that nobody has struck me down in retaliation. The DoD has heard all this stuff before. I think so. I and about 30 other C3POs, we proposed that 50% to the DoD 3 years ago. We sent them a letter, and they said thank you very much.
as they do.
And I just sit here thinking, if they had started with a low bar that companies could actually pass 3 years ago, we would already be up to the 80% this year. But we're still in this situation where we're afraid to impose the requirement on companies because, again, we might not have any contractors available,
right,
because this is very hard to do. Now, The largest companies can generally pass the CMMC assessment. They have the money, especially like the biggest defense contractors. That's all they do. They have very secure networks. They've been doing this for a while. They're awesome. Where we see issues is, and honestly, there's very large companies that I work with, Fortune 100. There's a few Fortune 100s that I work with that are not, they couldn't pass one today. And then that extends down the line to the medium-sized companies and the smalls. The real pain is being felt by the small companies. I about once a week, I get an email or a call from a very small company, right? I have 10 employees. I am a manufacturer. We cut parts out of metal. And we're being told that we need to do CMMC level 2. And my profit for the year is $100,000, right? How do I do this? And I don't have a great answer. There are ways to get help with this, not financial help at this point, but there are ways to leverage other companies' expertise to do it more efficiently, right? So there's large managed service providers that focus on CMMC, and if you pay them money, they will do all the CMMC things for you. They will build a new network for you. They will manage it. They'll give you new computers, and it will all be secure. But it will cost probably more than that profit margin is for them to do that for you.
Right.
And, if a 10-person company, they might be able to do it. But when I get the call from the 2-person company, I don't have an answer at all, right? So for those guys, possibilities are talking to your primes and asking if you can use their system, right? Could I bid $3,000 more per year and you give me a computer to use, for example, right? Or is there any way that you can keep the CUI over there and I come look at it with my eyeballs and then I go back to do the work? There's ways of thinking your way out of this, but there's a surprisingly large amount of companies that are running on, gmail.com email and personal MacBooks that have CUI who have they don't have any security, right? Maybe they have antivirus, maybe. And that's how they've been operating for years. And this is, we need to fix it, right? We shouldn't have that data on these insecure computers. But at the same time, they don't have the means to fix it themselves.
All right. Well, so let me ask you this. Are there any events or books that you would recommend for people to learn more about this?
One of the best events is the cloud, it's CS2. So Summit 7, which is they're a managed services provider that focuses on CMMC. They have events maybe 3 times a year, and they're called CS2. And you can Google it. And those are probably the best source of information. I'm a little bit biased because I've been asked to speak at a couple of them, but really good quality information. I also, if you are a IT person or a cybersecurity person at a company that needs to do CMMC, I recommend getting training to be a CMMC certified professional. And that's expensive training. It's a few $1,000s. The other option is to go buy a book. So Edwards Performance Solutions, they offer the certified CMMC professional book, which is like $100 or something. And that's a good source of information.
Excellent.
I'm also biased for Edwards because I teach CCP and CCA that I teach the certified professional as well as the certified assessor courses for them. I've taught a little bit more than 200 assessment students at this point. So they do have good curriculum.
Excellent. Well, so then tell us about yourself. I mean, let's switch this around a little bit, and you know, how does one get into this? You know, into the cybersecurity. I mean, you gave us a little bit there of, you know, starting as a help desk person, sysadmin, systems engineer, and moving your way up there. Is that the suggested route that you would suggest for, you know, somebody 10, 15 years old right now looking at the cybersecurity professional career? Start off as a help desk and move your way up?
Golly, for the 15-year-olds out there. For me, one of the things that worked when I was in my early 20s was I worked for free. So I had a job at a help desk, but it was a big organization that I was working with, and they had system admins and engineers. And when I finished my day at the help desk doing password resets, I walked across the hall to the system engineering department, and I spent 2 hours doing free work over there, you know, building servers, setting up databases, and that was invaluable to me. Now, most people can't afford to just lose the income. So I understand that, but it was very helpful to me personally to volunteer and get exposure to that stuff that I would not normally be allowed to see. Now, there's a lot of people that go straight into cybersecurity. And I really appreciate the folks that spend time as system admins or network admins who've had exposure building and operating the system and having to support users and have the users be functional, as opposed to people that just go straight into cybersecurity, because it gives you such a better understanding of what it takes to not just be secure, but not breaking the network, right? Not taking down the business. What's a reasonable approach? It's a much more, some of the best cybersecurity people that I know, they have that broad experience, and it's so helpful.
Yeah, definitely need to have some application experience, network experience, system administration experience. It definitely helps to understand how that goes.
Yeah. So I actually am a mentor for a workforce development program regionally, and one of the things that I've learned is that a lot of the cohorts are struggling with okay, which path do I take? And so I actually got to the point where I had to explain to them, listen, you know, we're all worried about hacker. The villain is the hacker, right? But I think a lot of people portray the hacker as a criminal with a hoodie. What we're missing is that they're actually arsonists too. And so if you think about that industry, because they set these little digital backdraft fires, right? Where you don't know you get hit, and they set the fires and they hold the match over the data. Hey, pay up, or I'm going to drop the match, right? Kind of a concept. And so I said, so it's kind of like learning to be a firefighter. You're not going to get in there and fight the fire day one. You're going to have to carry hoses. You're going to, you know, you have to do other things first. And so John's point of, you know, you have to do a little application, a little bit of system, a little bit of network. I do believe to some degree, there is a rite of passage in that approach, is that you do have to get your hands dirty in as many places as possible. And I love your approach because, well, selfishly, I did the same thing. I worked for free when I got started. So, and it worked out well for me. So I also had a great helper and technical mentor who happens to be in this call with us. He and I have known each other for some time. He was the guy helping me out on, you know, how to learn the tech and carry the ropes and carry the hoses and how to fight the fire, so to speak.
So should I get us all in trouble and ask whether cybersecurity can be an entry-level career?
It can be, but it has to be something in writing. If you're a great writer, that's where we suck as an industry in general. And so let's face it, a lot of the people that became techs, you know, have conceded to me many times, I couldn't pass that damn English class back in college. I do not want to write. And there's probably some good opportunities in what essentially are the data privacy side of the house that you could start out without having a ton of experience and not have to know the, let's call it the groundwork tech. So yes, but I think very specialized. And you're going to struggle if you try to break into other areas. So when you start to get it, your hands in the weeds, it's going to be a challenge. So probably not the answer a lot of entry-level cybersecurity people want to hear. But
yeah. So, John, what do you think? Can cybersecurity be entry level?
In the practice, no. I mean, it is very broad, and you definitely have to have some experience. You have to have some of those knocks of asking for money to fix a problem and not being able to get the money from a CFO or from without having a business need or what they feel is a valid business need. And that's from a management standpoint. I mean, there's the technical standpoint of just understanding the basics of how to get a packet from point A to point B. So I don't think it's an end there. I mean, when you talk about entry level, yeah, you're going to start off on the help desk, even at cybersecurity, from that standpoint. That's just there's a rite of passage that you got to understand.
I love what George said, where you can get into a cybersecurity job doing documentation. That is one of the places where you can succeed and you can start learning from there. If you read all the policies enough times, you start understanding the expectations, and then you can grow from there. But in many, many cases, and I know there's people screaming at their screens right now, in my opinion, cybersecurity is the entry level for cybersecurity is on top of you've already had experience in all of those other areas of IT, system administration, networking, development, incident response, right? Web applications. For you to really understand and be able to speak to an actual information system, which has all those things in it, you kind of need that foundational knowledge.
Yeah, I think we're all on the same page in that regard. Is that yes, there are some places, but for the most part, I mean, if you're super geeky or you think you want to get into something super geeky and you just love the cybersecurity concept, yeah, you have to go through just like a junior firefighter, right? Hackers are arsonists. We're not going to put you in front of the fire day one. You have to be a junior for a few years and learn how to clean the engine and learn how to do all those things, right? It's a great analogy. But the challenge always becomes looking at our paths, which, I mean, there wasn't an internet for me growing up, really. So I have to look at the consideration of how these are assumptions, or even with the data that we have that indicates that the starting level is sorry, you gotta write a passage first. We might be missing something. Right? I hope we're missing something, but the evidence right now, all the workforce development programs, including those with NIST, seem to indicate that it's really tough to get started without that experience first. So it really is. Data shows it.
So Amira, we got a couple quick questions here because we're running out of time. So one is, how can people find you?
I am on LinkedIn. So I'm the only Amira Armond. I also blog at cmmcaudit.org. So that's a free source of information. You don't have to put your email address in, which has a lot of good info about defense contractor cybersecurity and links to official sources. You can go to my company, Kieri Solutions. If you're interested in CMMC assessment prep, or documentation, compliance documentation, or consulting to help you get ready, Kieri Solutions is the right place to go.
Okay, great. And then one final question for you, which is, what do you do outside of work for fun?
I enjoy dog training, and I do search and rescue. So, and I've actually been able to combine the two. So I have a 2-year-old German Shepherd who he is absolutely convinced that if I tell him to go find somebody in the woods, that the next person he finds is going to have the greatest toys and party ever. And so he goes running off looking for anybody out there, and he comes back and tells me if he finds them.
Perfect. I mean, there's some people that I could probably like to train for that too. So, but we'll talk about that at a different time. All right, Kiera, I appreciate your time. Thank you very much. To our audience, we'd like to thank you for listening. And if you've learned something today, laughed, and, decided you want to do more controls, let us know, or give Kiera a call. But also tell somebody about this podcast. And that's it.
John, it's Amira, not Kiera.
I said Amira. All right.
Kieri Solutions is the company. Amira is the
Sorry.
the,
Oh,
the
wow.
me, the hat.
Oh,
That's the
then
hat.
I did screw it up. I apologize.
That's all right.
All good.
I like that here. We like to be transparent when we.
There it is. This has been another great episode of Pineapple on Pizza with your host, John and George, and we'll see you next time. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you all for joining another great episode of Pineapple on Pizza. You can find show notes, links, and resources by visiting omnistruct.com/blog. And a huge thank you to all who are preventatively protecting organizations from cyber threats.